Hi, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you a very beginner-friendly tutorial for Kinusaiga art, including the instructions and materials that I like to use for this art form. Now before we get started, there's a couple things that are super important to talk to you about. I first want to acknowledge Setsu Maeno, who is the original founder and creator of this Japanese art form. I highly encourage to go check out her art. She does have an Instagram and is a lovely person to talk to. I also want to acknowledge Natalie Barnes, who is a dear friend of mine and mentor in many art forms. She's the one that exposed me to Kinusaiga art, who really gave me a wonderful foundation to start exploring this art form and take it to a new direction to personalize it. My hope is that you are able to take all of this information that I share with you today and make it truly your own. I do want to make it very clear that there are some things to watch out for when you are exploring Kinusaiga. And that's regarding intellectual property, specifically also around intellectual property of artists. Now, I am going to share with you how I made this piece. I'm not going to go into the way that I designed the template, although if that's something you're interested in, please let me know in the comments and maybe I'll be able to share that later on. But I do want to make it very clear, I have seen people before take pictures of artwork from online or seeing someone else's artwork and deciding that they want to make a piece that's based off of that. And I want to really encourage you to use real photos that you have taken and either trace those, or if you are inspired by somebody else's art and you want to make a Kinusaiga out of that, please just contact the artist if you can, if we know that the artist is alive and well. Now, obviously, I can't control what you use to make your templates for Kinusaiga, but if you are planning on sharing this either on social media, selling it, which I'm totally okay with anybody choosing to monetize or not to monetize, but please just make sure that whoever the original artist is of the template or the design is acknowledged and given credit. I really do not want to see any of my designs being made by somebody else unless they've asked for permission, because I've worked really hard to design these templates and I want to make sure that people acknowledge the hard work that I put into it. And one last thing, please do not input any of my art, any of the art that you see me do into any kind of AI, ChatGPT, or any kind of search engine that utilizes AI, because I would really like to keep this as my art and I don't want any of my intellectual property out there being used to create fake art. Please support real artists. And since I am sharing this tutorial for free, the only thing that I really ask of you is to interact with it, share it with your friends, and please, if you decide to use any of the content that is in this video, to ask me for permission before you do so. And consider liking this video and giving me a follow on this platform and on others. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, TikTok, and here. Let's get started. First, let's go over all of the materials that I used to make this piece. This is the insulation foam that I like to use, also known as polystyrene board. You can find it at most hardware stores. It comes in thicknesses down to 1/2 inch to 3 inches, but I prefer the 1 inch. It comes in pretty large sheets, but you can ask them to cut it down to size for you. Next, you'll need a double-sided adhesive sheet. I like to use this one by 3M, which is called 468 MP, but any double-sided adhesive sheet will do. Cut your double-sided adhesive sheet to size to match the piece that you are currently working on, and then stick one of the sides to the top of the insulation foam. Now you'll need a tool for tucking. Natalie Barnes is actually the one that showed me to use the wrong side of seam ripper, and you can find these at most craft stores. They're pretty inexpensive. You'll also need a really sharp pair of scissors. I like these Kai bent scissors because I can cut the fabric pretty close to the surface without my fingers getting in the way. You'll need some kind of a precision knife, like an X-Acto. As long as it's sharp, long, and skinny, it'll do the trick. You'll need a template of your choosing. You can also just cut your design right into the foam freehand if you'd like. And of course, you'll need some fabric. I enjoy fabrics that are saturated in color, have a very tight weave to them, and don't give a lot in terms of stretch. But that's a personal preference, so you can just explore different fabrics as long as you are patient. I like to check to make sure that my fabrics aren't see-through and that they have a lot of cover but still remain thin enough to work with. And truly, I just like to use scraps of fabrics from other projects, and that's what all of these are. Next, I take my template and I tape it down to the top to make sure that it stays in place and is nicely secured. I just use a little bit of Scotch tape and tape each of the sides down. Then I grab my precision knife and very slowly and carefully I cut over the lines of the template. Now, if you are a little bit wobbly or if you make any kind of mistakes, this art form is very forgiving, but I do recommend just taking your time and being very careful to make sure that you don't accidentally nick your fingers because these precision knives are very sharp. The other point to make about using this precision knife is that you don't need to go very deep with your initial cuts. You want to make sure that you cut through that double-sided adhesive sheet that's on the top and maybe another 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch deep. If you cut too deep into the insulation foam, it could compromise the structural integrity of your piece, so just keep that in mind as you are working. Once I'm done cutting my template, I like to carefully remove all of the tape template pieces so that I'm left with just that board and the double-sided adhesive sheet sticking to the top. The fun part about this art form is you can really get started anywhere, but I'm going to start by tackling this sun piece first. I like to use the edge of my seam ripper to carefully remove each template piece. Now I'm going to place a piece of fabric over that sticky adhesive sheet and very gently rub the top to secure it. The nice part about using an adhesive sheet like I am here is that it does hold onto the fabric relatively easily, but it also can be readjusted if I don't like the placement. Then I carefully use the back of that seam ripper again to trace over where I cut in with that precision knife. It's okay if you make some mistakes while you're doing this, but again, moving slowly does help. I really like the way that I've placed this fabric, so now I'm going to go ahead and carefully cut around the piece. And because I've tucked in the very edge, it's pretty secure and is not going to move as I'm trimming away the extra fabric. I like to try to leave about 1/4 of an inch of a seam allowance on the very outside of where I will be tucking in the fabric in case I want to reposition it all later on. And then I carefully push in that fabric even deeper into the groove that I made with that precision knife. I like to tuck the fabric in very slowly with the wrong side of the seam ripper and take small passes over and over again into the crease. I find that if I push really hard over where the fabric is supposed to go in between, sometimes I can push too hard and I don't want the fabric to get dislodged at all or to loosen up the little bit of space that I've cut into the insulation foam. The more that you are pushing deeply and the more that you are wiggling around inside of that seam, it's going to widen up that cut that you made between the insulation foam and it'll start to actually collapse the foam a little bit. So taking your time and making very small, slow motions while you are tucking is key. Getting a feel for the way that the foam feels underneath your hand when you are pushing the fabric into the piece truly is the part that I think has the most of a learning curve when it comes to Kinusaiga, so just be patient. You can also even practice tucking fabric into a scrap piece of foam first before you start applying it to a piece of art that you would like to have finished. That way it's a little bit low pressure and you can try and figure out what works for you first before it's on a piece that you'd really like to do well. I like to take that paper off of the top of this double-sided adhesive sheet, one little sliver of the template at a time. Again, this is an art form that is a little bit on the slower side once you get started, but the payoff is so great. Tucking around corners and around places where the sections of your Kinusaiga template meet other sections that already have been tucked can be challenging. Again, I just really encourage you to get a feel for the way that it feels when you are tucking. It's hard to explain truly how to find the right way to do it. I really just think practice is the thing that's going to make it a little bit more easy for you. So just be patient with yourself. And here's a time lapse of me finishing the rest of this piece because I don't really have too much more to add, and I figure it might just be nice to be able to watch me work. Again, if you have any questions while you are watching, please feel free to ask me in the comment section and I'll try my best to answer. Notice that I'm not tucking in the sides at all when I'm doing this. I just let it kind of overhang on this foam board, and that's because I like to tackle that at the very end of the piece, and I'm going to show you that in a little bit here. Something worth mentioning though is if you don't like the sides of your board to be exposed at all, you can make sure that you have enough fabric overhang on the sides to wrap all the way to the back. But this is how I like to tackle it. I make tiny little cuts right on the very edge side of the piece, and then I tuck those extra overhangs right into those little grooves that I made, and I don't use any kind of adhesive sheet on the side here. I like to frame my pieces when I'm all done, so it's okay if the sides are exposed. But again, you can put enough fabric in to wrap all the way around to the back if you'd like. Now it's ready to be framed. I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial. Let me know if you have any questions, and have fun creating.